Hi, I'm Hayley from Story Brewers, and today I'm going to be explaining every detail in this fictional 19th century letter. Why is it important, and what does it reveal? The letter I'm looking at today is from our epistolary game, my late father's Correspondence. And it is from day 7 of the game, so if you're not up to day 7 yet, get there first as there will be spoilers. If you want a spoiler-free video, check out the one I made of the very first letter in the game, which I've linked in the description. Today we're going to be talking about two things that no gentry family should be without: servants and money. This letter has been written on December 20th, 1832, and again it is from your aunt. So I'm going to read the letter first, and then we'll be talking all about what it says about your family's wealth. My darling Aggie, you'll not believe what has happened. I've heard from Nicholas. He said that he received my letters all at once, having finally visited the post office to check for correspondence from the family sent to his old residences. He gave me his current address. Nicholas said he may return to Eadley at some point in the future, but has asked me to remit the funds from the will to his account in the interim. Technically that is possible, the lawyers could arrange it, but I'd rather he come back and see to care of the estate and have things done properly. Still, I am truly most sensitive to your needs in this situation. What would you prefer I do? I can delay the transfer of funds for a few weeks if you would like. After that, I am bound by law to make the transfer. At least once the transfer has been made, I can return to Habisher to keep you company. Once the transfer of funds is complete, your allowance will be dependent on Nicholas, though it would be a very uncharitable thing should he decide to alter it in any way. You do have a dowry provided in the will. It is £4,000, which is equal to some £160 a year, a well enough amount to satisfy, say, an army gentleman of £1,000 a year? Not that I am thinking of Captain Hughes, although, since I am on the topic, how are you finding him? Still, I think in one way or another, things will surely be resolved, and that at least gives me some peace. But on to cheerier topics. The Habisher Christmas ball awaits in just a few days. How are your preparations? You will certainly have been in mourning long enough for it to be perfectly acceptable for you to add some silks and trimmings to your black attire. I do hope you will be able to have some fun. Truly, you deserve some, my dear. Yours with greatest affection, Gertrude Allington. Now here's the cover of this letter, and as you can see, it is exactly the same as the letter from your aunt I discussed in the first video. So I'm not going to say much more about that, but if you want to hear me talk about postmarks in great length, I recommend that video. So we're going to go straight into the content of the letter. And we're going to focus on the section of the letter where your aunt talks about your dowry. She says it is £4,000, which is equal to some £160 a year. So what is a dowry? Why is it important? Is £4,000 a lot? And where does this £160 a year come from? And most importantly, will Nicholas be rich once he inherits Eadley Hall? And is Captain Hughes rich right now? So there's a lot to break down here. Let's start with dowries. So most people know that a dowry is an amount of money brought into marriage by a woman from her family. But a lot of people don't know why a dowry was so important. Obviously, a larger dowry would allow you to attract a gentleman further up the social ladder, but it was far more than just that. Your dowry was the key to two things: your pin money and your jointure. Pin money was the amount of guaranteed allowance a woman had under a marriage contract, and it was generally set at 2% to 5% of the dowry. This is essentially meant to represent the interest on the dowry you could withdraw every year. So if your dowry is £4,000 per year and it receives an approximate interest of 4%, which is pretty standard, your marriage contract might allow you £160 of pin money. Theoretically, this amount of pin money is what you'll get when you marry. But if Nicholas does not do his damn duty and advocate for you in the marriage contract, then who knows what you're actually going to end up with. The second thing your dowry determined was jointure. Jointure is an annual annuity a woman received if her husband passed away. So a set amount of money she would receive every year for life. And it's usually 10% of the dowry. The classic example of jointure is in Sense and Sensibility, where Mrs. Dashwood receives jointure of £500 per year after Mr. Dashwood's death. It's important to note that only upper and some middle-class women would arrange marriages in this way, and many women had no guarantee of money independent of their husbands at all. So the dowry system could be a good way of making sure that should something happen to your husband, you're not left so much out in the cold. So is your £4,000 dowry a lot? And what does it say about the overall wealth of Eadley Hall? To answer this question, we are first going to talk again about Captain Rajiv Hughes. Now, Captain Hughes has a yearly income of about £1,000 per year, And this again represents interest on the total wealth of his estate, which could be about £20,000. Added to this would be his comparatively small salary from his work as an army captain, which after expenses is likely to be less than £200. So how rich does this make Captain Hughes? In a way, it's actually kind of hard to compare his £1,000 a year to today's money because the cost of things in 1832 and in 2025 aren't in the same proportion. But I think we can confidently say he is a well-off dude. He's not a 1%er, but he's probably in the upper class. If he were a love interest in an Austen novel, he would be about equal with Edward Ferrars at the end of Sense and Sensibility. He's about 2/3 of a Captain Wentworth. So what about your dowry of £4,000? How rich does that make you and Ely Hall? Well, the amount of a dowry can't exactly tell us the worth of an estate. A dowry was a combination of many factors, including the type and size of wealth a family has, how its investments, inheritance, and tenancies work, and other factors like that. But it would be a fair guess to reason that the estate of Colonel Thomas Lockley is worth somewhere between £1,000 and £2,000 a year. However, we actually have good reason to believe that Ely Hall's wealth is closer to the £2,000 mark, and this reason was revealed to us way back on day 4. Remember this letter from your butler and housekeeper? No Regency household of middle class or above would lack servants, and Ely Hall is no exception. And while your aunt mentions you're all alone at Ely, in fact, you'd be surrounded by people, but of course, being surrounded by people you can't talk to might be, in a way, even more lonely. But the number and type of servants in a household reveals a lot about its income. This letter alone talks about 4 servants. Your butler and housekeeper, who are the head of the staff, Mrs. Preston, the cook, not as fancy as having a French man cook as they were called, but still important, and Sammy, whose job is not known but who would most likely be a footman. By 1832, households were employing less staff than the century beforehand, as staff had become more expensive, especially men. For Ely Hall to have a butler, assuming that Colonel Lockley was not an extravagant spender, which he really does not seem, it would have to enjoy an income of at least £1,500, and to have a butler and a footman, probably closer to £2,000 per year. In Samuel and Sarah Adams' infinitely fascinating book, The Complete Servant, which was written in 1825, they suggest that a household with an income of £1,500 to £2,000 might have 5 male servants and 6 female servants for a total of 11. 3 of the men would likely work outside, being the coachman, the groom, and the gardener. The last 2 would be a butler and a footman. Now, if your father's income was closer to or even above the £2,000 mark, he might also decide to spring for a valet, who would be his personal servant. But I'm gonna guess that he would not be the type, in which case the butler or footman would have dressed him as needed. As for the 6 female servants, there is of course the housekeeper and the cook, as well as 2 housemaids, 1 maid to help in the kitchen, and then the poor unfortunate laundry or general maid who had to do all the household laundry, which was practically a full-time job. One of the housemaids, most likely the upper housemaid, who would be the more senior housemaid, would also help you to dress in the morning and do your hair, that kind of a thing. So if we estimate that the income of Ely Hall is between £1,500 and £2,000, we might conclude that Captain Rajiv Hughes is, while a social equal, a slight step down financially. You might have to make do with a housekeeper and a footman, but alas, no butler. But you could certainly do much worse than £1,000 a year, plus 116 pin money from your dowry. So that is a walkthrough of this letter from day 7 of my late father's correspondence. I hope it gave you an insight into all the money chat in the game, and just where the Lockleys sit in society. And if you are watching this mid-game, enjoy days 8 and 9. There are some very juicy letters in store.